Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are going to go ahead and begin this discussion this morning. We will be talking about the RCRA Biennial Report. Welcome, everyone. And you'll see a chat box where there has been a link sent out just a few moments ago. You click on that link, you could download a copy of this presentation to follow along, take notes. But we appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to join us for this presentation. And with that, we'll go ahead and begin. First off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Steve Ryko. I am a instructor and a consultant here at NES. I've been in the haz waste handling and management space for over 20 years, have worked with clients classifying their waste, profiling their waste, including those facilities that are subject to biennial reporting, have assisted with the completion and the submittal of the biennial report. So any questions that come up as we go through this presentation, I will be more than happy to address and have the background information to provide you the appropriate answer. Now, we have quite a few topics that we're going to cover, and this is an outline of those topics that we're going to proceed through as we discuss biennial reporting. First and foremost, we want to know who is subject to reporting. So we'll identify those facilities that are required and subject to the biennial reporting. And then it is important, if we have to report, we have to understand which hazardous wastes are and those wastes which are not subject to reporting. So we'll provide that information. And then we're going to look at the specific information and elements that we have to report, not only for our site, but specifically for each of those hazardous waste streams that are subject to the biennial reporting. And then we'll talk about the due date for the report. How we complete and submit the report will be the final section. Now, as we proceed through this, if questions come up, I am happy to address those questions at the point they come up. Two options for you folks. You could either take yourself off mute, speak directly to the group, address a question to the group, or the chat box on your screen, you could send a message via the chat box. So in real time, any questions that come up, I would be more than happy to address those. Either of the means, we could communicate via the chat box, or we could speak directly to each other. And additionally, as we conclude this presentation, I will open it up and address any questions that may come up at that point. So with that, we're going to go ahead and begin. And the first element that we want to identify and look at is who is subject to biennial reporting. So when we talk about biennial reporting, the reporting is required of any facility, any site that is a generator and who is specifically a RCRA large quantity generator. Now, RCRA is the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, and you'll see that also identified in your chat box there. So not every hazardous waste generator in the state of California is subject to biennial reporting, nor is every large quantity generator within California subject to biennial reporting. Specifically, the reporting is required of those generators that are RCRA large quantity generators. In addition to the RCRA large quantity generators, any facility that treats, stores, disposes is also subject to the biennial reporting. Now, most of us are not permitted facilities, but rather we operate under interim status as a large quantity generator. So what's going to be applicable to us in regards to whether or not we have to report would be the basis of our facilities meeting that definition as a RCRA large quantity generator. Now, to clarify for you folks, how we determine whether or not your site, your facility is a RCRA large quantity generator is based on any one of these three elements that you see on the screen here. So in a single calendar month during the reporting year, if your site generates 1,000 kilograms or more of non-acute RCRA hazardous waste, you would be subject to biennial reporting. Now, when we look at that threshold for 1,000 kilograms, that is what is stated in regulations. The conversion, so we could picture it probably more easily in our mind, that is used by the state. If you have a solid waste, 1,000 kilograms is equivalent to 2,200 pounds. And if that solid waste is accumulated in 55-gallon containers, those containers may weigh anywhere from 400 to 500 pounds. So if you're generating 5+ drums that contain that solid waste of a non-acute RCRA hazardous waste in a single month, you would be considered to be a RCRA large quantity generator. Now, in regards to liquid hazardous waste, the conversion used by the state for the 1,000 kilograms is 270 gallons. And again, that would be about 4 or 5 55-gallon drums per month of those non-acute RCRA hazardous waste streams that were generated. Now, if you generate any acute RCRA hazardous waste in a calendar month, the threshold is much lower. It is 1 kilogram of a acute RCRA hazardous waste generated in any single month. For perspective, that 1 kilogram is equivalent to 2.2 pounds, or in the case of liquid, 1 quart. So if it is a acute hazardous waste in any calendar month in a reporting year, we generate more than that 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, or 1 quart. If it is a liquid acute hazardous waste, we would be considered to be a RCRA large quantity generator. Now, if it is a case where we had a acute hazardous waste on site, and as a result of a spill release of that acute hazardous waste, we generated more than 100 kilograms of that contaminated material from cleaning up a spill of an acute hazardous waste, we would also be considered to be a RCRA large quantity generator. Now, that 100 kilograms is equivalent to 220 pounds, which would roughly be about half of a 55-gallon drum if it was a solid waste. In regards to liquid, that would be approximately 27 gallons, or again, for a liquid waste spill cleanup contaminated material with acute hazardous waste, about half of a 55-gallon drum. And again, when we consider whether or not we are a RCRA large quantity generator, which would subject us to this biennial reporting, it's any one of these three elements that occurs at any single calendar month at our facility within the reporting year. So it's not based on what is averaged out in regards to generating non-acute RCRA hazardous waste or acute RCRA hazardous waste, or the spill cleanup from a acute RCRA hazardous waste, but rather it is what we generate in any single month. Now, the reporting years are each odd number years. So 2021 happens to be a reporting year. And our next reporting year would be 2023 and onwards with those calendar years that end in odd number years. Now, when we generate these quantities of hazardous waste that we looked at previously, non-acute RCRA hazardous waste, acute RCRA hazardous waste, or spill cleanup from a acute RCRA hazardous waste spill, and making that determination whether or not we are subject to biennial reporting. It is only based on what we generate in hitting that status as a RCRA large quantity generator in the reporting years, those odd number years. So we don't have to account for what we generate in those even number years, whether or not to determine whether or not we are subject to the biennial reporting. Now, the reporting cycle will be open January 2nd of this coming year. So this is our reporting year. The reporting cycle will begin January 2nd of next year. Now, as we look at making that determination for RCRA large quantity generators, we are specifically looking at the RCRA federally regulated hazardous waste. And for our RCRA hazardous waste, our RCRA hazardous waste, as identified on the screen here, could be considered to be a non-acute hazardous waste or an acute hazardous waste. Now, to determine whether or not our waste is a non-acute or an acute RCRA hazardous waste is summarized here. So if we happen to have a hazardous waste that exhibits a RCRA characteristic of ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, or toxicity, those characteristic wastes are considered to be non-acute hazardous waste. So any of the characteristic wastes which you generate at your facility, whether it exhibits a characteristic of ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, or toxicity, those are considered to be non-acute hazardous waste. Now, in addition to characteristic waste, RCRA also has 4 different lists of hazardous waste. And 3 of these lists are comprised of waste that would be considered to be non-acute hazardous waste. That includes our F-listed waste. However, not every waste on that F list is a non-acute hazardous waste. So we'll look at that more closely momentarily. Our K-listed waste, K list and our U list are also comprised of RCRA hazardous waste that are considered to be non-acute. Now, in regards to our acute RCRA hazardous waste, it's none of our characteristic hazardous waste. It is some of the waste on our F list and any of the waste on our P list. So when we're making that determination, again, whether or not we're a RCRA large quantity generator, it comes down to the quantity of non-acute and acute RCRA hazardous waste generated in any calendar month. Now, all RCRA characteristic waste will be assigned a EPA hazardous waste number D001 through D043. So if you have any waste that has been assigned one or more of those hazardous waste numbers that begin with a D, that indicates that that waste is a RCRA characteristic hazardous waste. And those, again, those RCRA characteristic wastes are non-acute hazardous waste. Now, in regards to our 3 lists, F, K, and U, our F listed wastes, those are spent waste from non-specific sources. In any of the F listed wastes, those spent waste from non-specific sources, with the exception of waste assigned EPA hazardous waste number F020, F021, F022, F023, F026, and F027 are considered to be non-acute RCRA hazardous waste. Likewise, our spent waste from specific sources are identified on our K list. Every waste on the K list is also considered to be a non-acute hazardous waste, as are those wastes on our U list. Now, what distinguishes the F in the K list which again includes those wastes which are spent from our U-listed waste, or the U-listed wastes are unspent waste. These are off specification, unused, unspent waste. And those wastes on the U list identify hazardous waste, and in some instances, there may be wastes on that list that are included on that list because they might exhibit the characteristic of ignitability, corrosivity, or reactivity, but each and every waste on the U list would be considered to be a non-acute RCRA hazardous waste. So any of these wastes that you generate at your facility assigned a EPA hazardous waste number D001 through D043. If it is a characteristic waste, if it is a FK or U listed waste, those wastes would be considered to be non-acute. So that is when we have to determine, are we generating 1,000 kilograms or more, which again is equivalent to 2,200 pounds or more, or 270 gallons if it is a liquid hazardous waste or more in any calendar month. If that is the case, we would be considered to be a RCRA large quantity generator. Now, in regards for our acute RCRA hazardous waste, our acute RCRA hazardous waste are the F020, F021, F022, F023, F026, and F027 spent waste from non-specific sources. Those are all dioxin precursor waste. And then any and every waste on the P list. In the P list of hazardous waste is like the U list, where that is comprised of unspent, off specification, unused commercial chemical products. Any of those chemicals on the P list would be considered to be an acute RCRA hazardous waste. And additionally, not only are those waste on the P list considered to be a acute hazardous waste, but if you have a container that previously contained one of those P listed hazardous waste, and that container has residue of that waste within it, unless that container has been triple rinsed, the container would carry the P code as well, would be considered to be a acute hazardous waste. So if you generate any of these wastes and you happen to generate more than 1 kilogram, which is equivalent to 2.2 pounds, or 1 quart of any of these acute hazardous waste in a calendar month, again, you would be a RCRA large quantity generator. If it is a case where you had a spill release of any of these materials and you generated more than 100 kilograms, 220 pounds, or 27 gallons of spill cleanup from spilling any of these acute RCRA hazardous waste, you would also be considered to be a RCRA large quantity generator. Any questions regarding who's subject to reporting and how we make that determination whether or not our site is or isn't a RCRA large quantity generator? Any questions? Any clarification needed? Perfect. Well, let's proceed then. Now, when we talk about biennial reporting, and for determining whether or not we're subject to that biennial reporting, it is all based on RCRA hazardous waste, non-acute and acute RCRA hazardous waste. And when we report the waste that we generate as part of our biennial report, the only waste that we are subject to reporting are those RCRA hazardous waste, both the non-acute and acute RCRA hazardous waste. When we complete our biennial report, what is not included is any non-RCRA hazardous waste or any universal waste. Now, for us in California, one thing to consider to determine Not federally, whether or not we are a RCRA large quantity generator, but within the state of California, whether or not we are a large quantity generator, we are required to account for the quantity of non-RCRA hazardous waste that we generate at our site in any calendar month. So again, it could be a case based on the quantity of non-RCRA hazardous waste that you generate and accumulate at your site in a calendar month, where you would be considered in California to be a large quantity generator. But if you were below the thresholds for the RCRA hazardous waste, you would not be considered to be a RCRA large quantity generator. So you wouldn't be subject to biennial reporting. Or if you are a RCRA large quantity generator, when you report your activities in the waste, you do not have to report any non-RCRA hazardous waste that was generated during that reporting year. Likewise, any universal waste that is generated and accumulated at your facility is not subject to biennial reporting. Now, the information that we have to report, we have to provide our generator information, our name, our site address, our mailing address. We also have to provide our facility's EPA identification number. Now, one thing to consider for us in California in regards to our EPA identification numbers, we actually have two different types of ID numbers that are issued to generators within California. Your site could have a ID number that has been issued by the state, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, if you are not required to have a federal EPA ID number. And that ID number for your facility, that state issued ID number, would begin with the prefix of CAL. So if your facility's ID number begins with that prefix, you shouldn't be a RCRA large quantity generator. And if you are, you would then be required to obtain a federal EPA identification number that is issued to your site by the US EPA. In those federal EPA ID numbers issued by EPA, they will begin with a prefix of CA, CAD, CAR, or CAT. And that prefix is based on when that ID number was assigned to your facility. So your ID number, if you are a RCRA large quantity generator, should be a federal EPA ID number preceded with one of these four prefixes you see here: CA, CAR, CAD, CAR, or CAT. If you are a RCRA large quantity generator, you should not have a state ID number beginning with that prefix CAL. So that is information that has to be included as part of our biennial report. What we also have to identify for those RCRA hazardous waste that we generate is the name, the address, and the ID number where those wastes were sent to be treated, stored, or disposed of. And we are also required to identify transporter information. Again, we have to provide the name and the EPA identification number of that transporter who transported the waste from our facility to the TSDF that was receiving that waste to treat it, store it, or dispose of it. So this general information is required. We also have to provide a certification regarding the information that is included as part of this biennial report. Now, in addition to this general information for our site, where we sent our waste, who transported our waste, for each of our RCRA waste stream, for each of the federally regulated waste, whether it is non-acute or an acute hazardous waste, we have to provide some additional information. we have to provide a description of that hazardous waste. We identify what type of waste it is: spent solvent, spent corrosive materials. We identify a description of that waste. We also have to identify the EPA hazardous waste number, or numbers that have been assigned to that waste. Those EPA hazardous waste numbers will all be preceded by a letter. If that waste exhibits a characteristic, the waste code will be preceded by a D. If that waste appears on a list, based on which list that waste appears on, it will be preceded by a F, a K, a P, or a U. So we have to provide any and all of the EPA hazardous waste numbers that are assigned to that specific waste stream. We also have to identify the California Hazardous Waste Code. Now, our California Hazardous Waste Code could be easily distinguished from the EPA hazardous waste numbers, because where those EPA hazardous waste numbers are a 3-digit code preceded by a letter, the California Hazardous Waste Code is a 3-digit numeric code. There will be no letter preceding that California waste code. We also have to include waste minimization efforts. Now, in regards to the waste minimization efforts, it is a specific code that we have to provide for those waste minimization efforts. And the code identifies the waste minimization effort associated with that specific waste stream. Other information that has to be provided for each of our hazardous waste streams: we have to provide a source code that identifies ongoing production, the source in which that waste was generated. We also have to include a form code to identify the specific matrix of that waste. And then we have to indicate for each of our waste streams a waste management method code. So in addition to the general waste description, the EPA hazardous waste number, California waste codes, we will have additional codes for each and every one of our RCRA hazardous waste as part of that biennial reporting to indicate the source, the form, waste minimization activities, and the management of that waste when it was shipped off-site to that permitted treatment, storage, disposal facility that accepted that waste. So this information is included for each and every RCRA hazardous waste stream. Now, the biennial report is based on your site being a RCRA large quantity generator in a reporting year. Now, the reporting year, again, is any year that ends in an odd number. And what is required if you are subject to biennial reporting in that reporting year is that your biennial report has to be completed and submitted by March 1st of the year following the reporting year. So your reporting year will be an even numbered year. And again, the biennial reporting cycle begins January 2nd of this coming year, and the official due date for your biennial report is March 1st of 2022. So in regards to the biennial reporting process, first we have to determine, are we subject to biennial reporting this year? Would we be considered to be a RCRA large quantity generator? If so, then we have to prepare that biennial report and identify each and every one of our waste streams that are federally regulated. We have to identify the name of the waste streams. We have to include those associated codes for the form, the source code, waste minimization efforts, the management methods when that waste was shipped offsite. We have to identify also the quantity for each one of those waste streams that we generated on site in the quantity that was shipped off site. Now, the biennial report must be completed on a U.S. EPA form. And the form is EPA form number 8700-13. Now, all RCRA large quantity generators, not only are they subject to biennial reporting, but also these RCRA large quantity generators who have been issued a EPA identification number from the US EPA are required to perform a renotification every other year. In the biennial reporting, completion and submittal of EPA Form 8700-13, that satisfies for RCRA large quantity generators the EPA identification number renotification. So there is not a separate notification required if you are a RCRA large quantity generator. That renotification is completed as part of your biennial reporting. Now, EPA, the US EPA at their website, they do provide a copy of EPA Form 8700-13A. This report has 72 pages. Now, the bulk of the information included in this report is directions and guidance on whether or not you are subject to the reporting, what wastes have to be reported, what information has to be included with reporting those RCRA waste streams, and all of those codes. The source code, the form code, the waste minimization codes, the hazardous waste management method codes, they are all included in that EPA form. So the bulk of the form is guidance. The rest of the form is information regarding your facility, the transporter, and then for each specific RCRA waste, the description, the codes, ID number, form codes, management codes, etc. So this document, 72 pages, which may seem a little overwhelming, but if you look at it, the bulk of that guidance is direction on who and what information has to be reported. Now, we do have the ability to go hard copy and complete EPA Form 8700-13. However, with the last reporting cycle that was due March 1st of 2020, what EPA pushed, as well as the state, what DTSC pushed, is that this information should be reported electronically via the RCRA info website. So this report does not get submitted, nor does it need to be submitted to the state. You don't have to submit it to DTSC, but rather this is federal reporting, and we have the ability to complete this report online at the RCRA info website. Now, this website is a federal website, and within this website, you have the ability to complete the biennial report. But the first thing that you have to do, if you are subject to biennial reporting, is you have to set up an account within the RCRA info site. In the RCRA info site has multiple uses within it. Not only can you complete your biennial report, submit your biennial report, but that report will reside within the RCRA info database. So you will have and be able to access an electronic copy of that report, which is to your benefit because the report has to be maintained by the generator for 3 years from the due date. So if you were subject to biennial reporting from the last reporting year, 2019, your report was due by March 1st of 2020, and that prior biennial report would have to be maintained and available at your facility until March 1st of 2023. If you're subject to biennial reporting this year, your report being due March 1st of 2022, a copy of that report will have to be maintained and available at your website until March 1st of 2025. And that report could be accessed and viewed within the RCRA info database. So that is one benefit. Now, within this database, it identifies your facility and the status of your facility. It will identify your federal generator status, your state generator status. It will provide for your facility, your facility's identification number, and then there will be tabs if you are a generator where you could complete that biennial report. So NES Inc., we are not a hazardous waste generator, and as such, I don't have any other tabs within our RCRA info database. But if we were a generator, I would have a tab here which would allow me to view my electronic manifest. So I would have access to manifests after those shipments were received at the TSDF. I would also have a tab for biennial reporting. And if I was a RCRA large quantity generator, as opposed to completing EPA Form 8700-13, I could go into my RCRA info site and I could complete and submit my biennial report all within the RCRA info database. So that is one ability that we have as generators within the state of California, rather than completing that hard copy, populating that hard copy, sending in those hard copy documents. And this information could be completed online electronically. Now, in regards to obtaining the information that is required for reporting, the waste codes, the hazardous waste management method codes, the company who transported your waste received that waste, that is something that you have to be able to obtain as the generator of the hazardous waste. However, most transporters or the TSDFs that you send your hazardous waste to, they will provide you a detailed report. So they'll identify your waste streams based on those waste codes, the quantity of waste that they accepted, the management method code. So that is typically the starting point that you will utilize in regards to collecting this information for your biennial report. And folks, believe it or not, that is everything that you need to know for biennial reporting. Before we wrap this up, does anyone have any site-specific questions or issues or consternation maybe with previously completing biennial reporting that they would like clarification for before we get wrapped up here? Any questions?
Hi, Steve. I have a question.
Absolutely. How can I help you out?
Cooling tower wood waste, is that exempt?
Cooling tower wood waste. Is it exempt? If it does not exhibit a RCRA characteristic, it would be exempt.
No, it's RCRA. It has arsenic and chromium. But I thought there was an exemption at one time for cooling tower wood waste. I don't know if that still applies.
There is exemptions for treated wood waste, but that exemption for treated wood waste only applies for certain industries, utilities, and only if the waste is a non-RCRA hazardous waste, not a RCRA hazardous waste. If that waste was a non-RCRA hazardous waste, you're not representative of one of those industries where that non-RCRA treated wood waste would be exempt from California Hazardous Waste Management Standards, you can obtain a variance from the state, from DTSC, to dispose of the non-RCRA treated wood waste as non-hazardous waste. But if that wood waste is a RCRA hazardous waste, there's no exemptions in California for management or disposal of a RCRA treated wood waste.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Hi, Steve. We do have a question in the chat box from a John Barnes.
Okay. If your facility closed this year, you would still be subject. You know what? That's a good question. Your facility closed. Was your facility a RCRA large quantity generator this year? Prior to closing, I assume that would be the case. Yes. That is a great question. I thought I would be able to address everything right off the top of my head. I'm going to say that if you were a RCRA large quantity generator, you would still, even if that facility closed, you would still be subject to biennial reporting. However, I'm not 100% confident in that response. If you provide me your email address, what I will do is I will look into that. I'll give you a definitive answer whether or not you're subject to that biennial reporting. I would say yes. EPA does have some exceptions for reporting for episodic events, but I don't believe there's anything addressed if your facility closes. Thank you for sending your email. I'll get a definitive answer for you. Any other questions? Is anyone still awake, or are you still working on that cup of coffee? All right, well, if there is no other questions, again, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their schedule to log in. Hopefully this has been useful information that you could take back and first and foremost determine whether or not you're subject to the biennial reporting, and kind of help ease any of the consternation or fear you have with reporting. NES, again, we provide training and consulting services. If there is any assistance or questions that come up after the fact, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We would be more than happy to help you out any way we can. And our contact information for the company is listed here on the screen. Again, we will make ourselves available for any questions that come up. Thank you, everyone, for logging in. I hope you have a safe afternoon, great weekend, and happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Reichow.
Thank you for taking time out of your schedule.